Hello, and a very warm welcome. Lorna, David, Bess and I have been exploring how recovery capital is accrued and thwarted differentially at four distinct phases of the recovery journey using 30 interviews from the UK respondents. So the four stages are presented on the slide. So firstly, getting started, how did people enter the recovery journey? Also early recovery, and then we also explored key turning points, and then later in more kind of stable recovery. And then within each stage, we explored how the three domains of recovery capital, how they express differentially. So we looked at personal, social, and also community capital. We recognize that the recovery journey is not exclusively positive. And so as such, we refer to negative recovery as the pains of recovery throughout our talk. So Lorna, what did the start of the recovery journey look like for our respondents?
Hi everybody. So just to answer David's question, at the start of recovery, it tended to be quite a chaotic phase. Some respondents spoke about leading almost a double life, for example, staying up the night drinking and then working the next day. And one person described sneaking out of work to take a joint or a pill. Around a third of respondents talked about the detrimental impact of mental health on their capacity to recover. And this was sometimes the start of a relapse. So this was especially common at the start of recovery, and respondents described trying various treatments. Some worked for an amount of time and then they would start using again. This cycle often repeated despite many attempts to stop, and this just shows that the road to becoming clean or sober is not linear or straight. Most of the sample tried drug treatment, and for some at the start of their journey, not being ready or being pressured into treatment meant that it was unsuccessful. Treatment was also described as being too rigid and just didn't mirror a chaotic lifestyle. So for example, one respondent describes that turning up 15 minutes late to treatment meant that he wouldn't be seen. And if this happened a number of times, he would have to start the treatment all over again. One of the really key motivational reasons for stopping was being or becoming a parent. So this was common amongst female respondents who described becoming pregnant or having children as the line in the sand or the straw that broke the camel's back. On a more negative side, the pains of romantic relationships was a strong theme and a source of ongoing trauma. Domestic violence, breakups, and controlling partners were all very frequent. And of the 89 comments that were made across the interviews on the subject of romantic relationships, 54 were negative for females, while only 17 were negative for males. So again, this is particularly common amongst the females in our sample. So David, what factors were operating in early recovery?
Yeah, so several key themes emerged in the early stages of recovery from the interview. So in relation to personal capital, childhood trauma and low self-esteem featured really heavily, but also many expressed not having a sense of purpose in this stage. And this resulted in a lack of vision and often created a sense of hopelessness amongst the respondents. Once the respondents were clean, it emerged that many of them had no paradigm of what being clean, sober, or straight looked like. And so consequently, they went on this journey and began to awaken to new perspectives, not only of themselves, but also the world around them. And they also uncovered that they had other addictions, or they later developed alternative addictions. And so the examples that came out were kind of turning to alcohol, casual sex, fitness, becoming a gym freak, and also becoming a training junkie with some of the phrases that they used. In relation to social capital, family discord was common, with over 2/3 of all family comments from the respondents being negative. Respondents also began to cut off drug-using friends and avoided places where they used to score. And once clean, many avoided kind of social and family celebrations and social events at work. However, strong relationships began to be formed in recovery groups that seemed to replace those old drug-using friendships. And then finally, in relation to community capital, accommodation was chaotic. So respondents were talked about getting evicted, becoming homeless, residing in bedsits, or having access to emergency style accommodation. Unemployment and having to work at kind of menial style jobs was also a common feature that they spoke about. And we found that the role of volunteering was therefore instrumental for respondents to gain confidence and gain new skills, but also interesting to broaden their social networks. And similarly, re-entry to education also helped them to kind of begin to acquire some new qualifications, improve employment prospects, but also gain legitimacy and broaden social networks again. And then finally, mutual aid groups were also instrumental in achieving positive change, equipping them to navigate their recovery journey. In relation to the next stage, Lorna, then, so what were some of the kind of key tipping points or turning points that our respondents encountered?
So some respondents appear to have a number of key breakthrough moments, or this internal shift in their decision about their desire to stop using. And this flip in their mindset created a separation from who they were before. And for others, this is a more gradual process of turning points. A lot of respondents struggled to maintain being clean unless they began to actually do work in a mutual aid group. And these groups provided tools to make positive changes. Recovery sponsors also acted as real key tipping points and provided support and alleviated isolation for respondents, as well as being someone whom they could identify with. And seeing other people living a clean and fulfilling life provided hope that this was possible. Finding purpose was also a real key tipping point for most, and this often came through work and achieving through promotions, where interviews described feeling useful in a way like never before. And this was linked to respondents moving forwards in their journey and stabilizing abstinence. So another stabilizing effect was leaving a negative or violent relationship, which provided a level of safety that was not present in the previous stages. And it was just an opportunity for them to be in a new environment without the influence of using. So on to the next stage, David, what does it look like to sustain the changes in later recovery?
Sure. So in relation to personal capital, both mental health and low self-esteem continue to be an issue that had caused some of the respondents to relapse in this stage. But for others, recovery had equipped them to now navigate these whilst also remaining abstinent. And the majority also said that they felt that they'd grown in confidence and self-esteem. We also asked the respondents to describe what their current life looked like. And so typical responses echoed the sentiment of the following respondent, who said that my life now is better than I ever imagined it could have been. And in fact, a minority of respondents said that they considered themselves to be post-recovery in this stage. And so that was that they'd now fully reintegrated into society. And as one respondent shared, he said, I really believe we need front doors, but we also need good exits. And finally, also in relation to social capital, at this stage, romantic relationships had stabilized and were vastly improved for many in the sample, and also family relationships had similarly improved a lot. Finally, in relation to community capital, at the time of the interview, almost all respondents reported having stable accommodation, and many now reported owning their own home. And also in relation to employment, 80% of respondents were now in employment, but also, interestingly, some were also in very senior management roles. And I think really importantly, a lot of the respondents spoke about enjoying their work and finding it fulfilling.
Thank you, David. So as previously mentioned before, we're currently conducting a new wave of research funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, looking at how COVID and lockdown has impacted the wellbeing and recovery of those in the sample, with a view to inform specialist services and providing care. So at present, we've conducted 17 out of 30 interviews with the same respondents. And although it's early to conclude anything absolute, we're seeing that so far among those in the earlier stages of recovery, there's a higher risk of relapse, and this is primarily with problem drinking. And for those in longer term recovery, we're seeing a lower relapse rate, but significant psychological problems linked to social isolation. So while online supports have been useful, they are seen to provide support without the essential fellowships.